Well, hello, and welcome to the Ultimate API Challenge, a place where we work, grow, and learn together with different APIs as well as a variety of tech stack in order to, by the end, create an end result that can be put on your web development portfolio. Your knowledge level doesn't play the biggest role, however, your willingness to learn and to challenge yourself does. If you're not comfortable with the level of this challenge, there are many previous challenges that you can hop on and test your skills. I'm gonna leave the links in the description box below so you can check them out. In this video, we're going to be building the famous Weather App API ReactJS thing. I'm saying famous because I have already one with this API, but not in React, with JavaScript, with plain JavaScript classes. But over my Instagram, I asked if you would like to have a spin-off on this API, but built in ReactJS, and the reaction was overwhelming. So let's get to it. First, be sure to have the starter files. I'll have the link in the description box below. Open it in your code editor of choice, and that's where you're gonna land. The package.json is a description of what the project has. This is the testing parts that I forgot to remove. The way how you get the React app in general, there is a script from ReactJS that offers you basically the whole package. You can then pick and choose what you want once you download it. So disregard those three. Then we have AXIOS. It's how we're going to communicate with our API. We also have Bootstrap for styles. Then we have a thing called Moment. It's going to help us format some of the dates that we have. Then React Bootstrap, React DOM, scripts. Web Vitals is also something from React. I think you can remove that if you want. Then we have the scripts and all the rest of the stuff, kind of like a boilerplate that you get from React. All right, so in order to get all those dependencies on our machine, we need to go to our terminal. And in here, we're going to do yarn install. You can do npm install, but in this one, I decided to go with yarn as it's, I don't know, just for a difference. There isn't that big of a difference from the two of those now. I think there used to be a difference. npm was less secure, but I think now npm kind of caught up. So it's kind of like more of a choice. Both Yarn and React are from Facebook, so I guess maybe they go together better. No, that doesn't mean anything. Just a personal choice. So we got everything installed. Let's go to the package.json, and we have scripts. We see that we have start, and that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna do yarn start, or if you chose npm, then you do npm start, npm run start. All right. It's on, and that's where we are. Perfect. Now, what are we gonna be building? I still didn't show you. So how about I'm gonna show you that first. So I started my finished result app. You have an input field, you have a button. It's exactly the same as our previous UI of the other weather app. And we have a loader, and we're gonna see the result. First, it takes a while, but then it kind of warms up and it shows us faster. There we go. Sunday, May 16th, that's the date of the recording. We have all the data here. Current weather, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I'm recording on a Sunday. So yeah, that's basically all that we have. And we're gonna recreate this interface in React. Now that we know what we're gonna be building, let's go through our code a little bit, or the starter files. The main thing where everything starts is index.js. We have here React DOM.render, and that's where we render our app. We also include Bootstrap CSS here and some custom CSS that we want to include for our app. All of the CSS for this app is already included in the project, so we can focus only on the JavaScript part. But as always, you're free to change whatever you want. It's completely up to you. Back to our index.js. We're rendering here our app. Quite simple, straightforward. As we have only one thing in our app, we're not going to be using any routing because it's just a submission of the form, then we're hiding and showing elements. So we don't need any routing. It's just on the main route. But yeah, we have our page component. We have our class name app. Do we have any class name? No, so I guess you can remove that. Sorry about that. You're gonna have small leftovers, or maybe it's a chance for you to change some things up if you would like to design the app. So now that we know what our app consists of, let's go to our page. And the page you can find in the components folder. That's where all of our components are gonna be. We have a page. It's a page component. Every component folder has index.js where you import, export the component, then you have the component itself, and you have a CSS to attach to it. That's usually the structure of React. You have index, you have the component, then you have the CSS. And that's how you kind of like decouple all the code that you have. All right, what do we have on the page? The page is basically what we're seeing here. We have the header. Let's check quick what the header is, an h1 tag with the style of heading and weather forecast. So we have the header. In the example that I showed you, we also had a little bit of a thing going on here. We had a box. So let's create that box. Our box is going to be a div with a class name, because in React you don't say class, you use class name. And in here, in the page, we already have CSS of a box. Let me show you how we include the CSS. We do an import of styles from our page module CSS, and then in here you do styles.box, because the box was the name of our class, and this is how you apply classes. Okay, then inside of here we're going to have a form with the button. We also need a loader. We need an error in case the form errored, or maybe the user was doing something that we cannot help them with. And as well as we need our forecast. We already have an error component here that I included. We also have our loader. Do we have the forecast? Yeah, we also have the forecast. So let's import all of those. All right, so we imported all of them. Let's put here our form, then we have our error, then our loader, and forecast. Cool. If we save, we see all of them, and that's not what we want. So let's comment everything else. Let's keep just the form. Okay, so the form. What do we have? Let's open the console right now. We have some warnings, which is absolutely fine because we have some unused imports that we have. The form doesn't do anything now. It just reloads the page, which is the natural behavior of a form, the native behavior of the form, of any HTML form. All right, let's first check what does the form look like. Sorry that I jumped like that. I usually press command and then I click on the form and then it redirects me where the component is. If you don't have this kind of shortcut, everything is in components, form, and then form.jsx. So the form, we have the form, we have an input field, and we have a button. So how do forms work? We can have a submit event as well as an on-click event. So let's add those. On submit, we're going to add something here. Let's call it also on submit. And this on submit is going to be here a function that we create. Since we saw that it's just reloaded the page, we want to prevent that. So we pass the event and we do e.prevent default, and then our form is not going to reload the page. So if I do this, submit, nothing happens. Cool. Then we want to add the same on submit function to the button, but on the button it's going to be on click, and we're gonna pass on submit. So the next step, we would want to extract whatever the input field has and to have it in that form before we send it anywhere further. So how can we know that? We're going to use a hook from React called useState. So let's import it, and in here we're going to write const square brackets location and set location. useState. We're going to pass it an empty string at first. Basically, you initialize a state here that is called location, and if you want to change the value of the location, you can use the function that this hook gives you, which is set location. Why do we use this syntax? This is basically whatever the hook returns you're using. You're gonna see it later on when we're gonna create our own hook. That's gonna be a little bit more clear, but just know that this is the syntax if you wanna use the native React hook useState. Now, where are we going to put this location? Where does it even appear? So we want to hook up this location to this input field. And the way we can do that is by setting a value on the input field, and we're going to pass to it the location. So for example, if I write here now Berlin, then see, it has now Berlin in it. And now you see an error that we have. You provided a value prop to a form field without an on-change handler. That's right, because we said that we want to update this location with whatever the user has here. So let's remove this, save it, and it's gonna be empty. So if I write something, cannot right now, then I want this value to update the const location. So the variable needs to hold this value. And the way we do it is by using the onChange event. We're gonna take the event that this onChange function gives us, and we're gonna call set location. So the one from here, it's a function, and we're gonna pass to it e.target.value. e.target.value is how we extract the value of the current element. In our case, input field. All right, so now let's try the console log. We should see something if we click. Yeah, there we go. You see? It changed. Cool. So before we continue, we must always check if we don't have location or the location equals to an empty string. Then we want to return because we don't want to continue if we don't have any location, because that's just the user is doing something that we do not support. Okay, but now that we have this thing, how do we send it to our API? What do we do? Let's get to that part. For that, we need to go back to our page. This is gonna be our main component where we do all the operations or we receive all the needed information. And this component is gonna bring further the information to the right smaller components. In React lingo, this is the parent component. In order not to do all the API calls and all the data manipulation that we want to do right here in the component, we're gonna first close components, and in the source folder, we're going to create a folder called hooks, and inside of it, we're going to create a file useForecast.js. Now that we have the use forecast, okay, let's write it const use forecast. And if you use the word use, then React knows that this is going to be a hook. And then we export default use forecast. Now in the page, let's import our hook. Import use forecast from, we go one level up, then we go to hooks, and then we go to use forecast. Save it. Perfect. Now, the way you use hooks is you just call them here and you call them like that. Right now, our hook doesn't do anything else than just existing. And let's just console log something here. Hello, I am the hook. Let's save it. And you see, as soon as you reload the page, you have hello, I am the hook, because the page component is included and we call the hook here. Something to note is that the hook can never be called in a conditional block, so you cannot call if something then call the hook. The hook always needs to be called outside of this kind of things. Okay, so our hook works. So if we look at the page, remember when we didn't comment all of those things, we had all of them on the page. We need to render them only once something is happening. So in case of an error, we need to render it only if there is an error. The loader only if there is a loading state, and the forecast only if there is a forecast. So for that, what are we going to use? Flags. That's correct. So const is error and set error, just like we did before with the form use state. If I confirm it, then it imported by itself, which is awesome. And we're going to set it to false by default. Then you can do this copy down is loading and set loading, as well as our forecast, const forecast and set forecast, which we're gonna get to later on. So remember how I said that this syntax of const square brackets something something is gonna make sense? Let me show you what I mean by that. So how do we communicate from this hook to this page? By returning something from a hook, right? Because this is just a basic function. It's just like in React lingo, it's called a hook because it has a use and it does like some other like magic behind the scenes. But plain JavaScript, it's a function. So we do return and we return an object, or you can return an array. So in case of React, in the use state, if you would go there, you would see a line that is doing return this and then your stuff. But in our case, we're gonna return an object because I feel like it's easier like that. It also can be named. You don't need to worry about orders. And we're gonna have several things, so it's gonna be more explanatory this way. So we're gonna return the is error, then we're gonna return the is loading, and we're gonna return the forecast. You save those, and then once you go to the page, the way how you retrieve those things is by doing const, you open curly brackets, equal this, and in here, you're listing all the things that you want to get. Basically, everything that the function returns. There you go. So all of them are going to be false at this point, although the forecast needs to be null because we don't have it. So now we can play around with it. So we can say that show us the error only if there is an error. If is error, meaning if is error is going to be true, which we're gonna make it true once we do have an error, then render this component. Now if I refresh the page, it's not gonna be there because the is error flag is false. Same goes to the loader. Let's do is loading and loader, and we can do the same with the forecast. Why I didn't call is forecast is because the forecast is going to actually hold information, so it's not just like a true or false. And the form we want to show if we are not loading, and actually this should be here. Yeah, does it make sense? Makes sense, right? Also, the error component receives a prop called message. In our case, we're gonna send just the error. The thing about flags is that if you make something equals true, or if you make it equal a string, JavaScript still sees it as true. So in our case, we can store the error in the isError. Instead of just saying that it's true, we can also store a message for the error. Now that we have this kind of setup, let's focus on our form, because our goal is to have our location. So whatever the user is inputting in this field, it needs to land here. And then here we're gonna do our call the API journey. How can we get it in here? Let's see. Where do we have our form? Our location is here on submit. From this form, this information needs to go back to the page, and then from the page, it needs to go up to the use forecast. From the form, we need to call some function with the location value, and this function, we're gonna create it here. It's const on submit equals, we're gonna call another function here. For now, let's just console log the value that we get. Let's pass on the value here, which we're gonna be passing from the form. And in order to get this in the form, we're just, where's the form? Here. We can just pass it as a prop. So on submit, or let's call it submit search. And we're gonna pass on submit. Go to the form. We're gonna here, usually you can write or props and then do props.submit search, or you can deconstruct it already here and write submit search. And what that gives us is the possibility to call our submit search with the location here. Want to check it out? Let's try. Refresh the page. Let's do Berlin. Search. Yay! This is our console log. That's how we got it. Now that we have this console log here, so we have the value here, we want to bring it further to the use forecast hook. So in here, we're going to create another function, and we're gonna call it submit request. We're gonna have our location, and let's console log location. In order to be able to call this function, we need to export it, not to export it, we need to return it. This is going to be available to us here, because here we have everything that we return from the hook. So we just extend that with submit request. We call the submit request here with our value, and that should work. Let's remove this console log here, save it. So once we do something here, we should see a console log of location and whatever we inputted. Let's put London for a change here. Search. There we go. Location in the use forecast. Line 10. Awesome. Line 10. There we go. Great. Now, one thing that we should come back to, there is such a thing called PropTypes. Import them. Import PropTypes from PropTypes. And what PropTypes basically do is they kind of prevent us during our development that we don't forget to pass any prop to any component, and because of that it's not going to break. And if you, for example, know that there is not going to be a prop passed, you can also set a default prop. Let me show you. In the error component we have that. So you basically expect a message and you tell that it's going to be of a type of a string, and if it's not required, then you can have a default prop, which is an error occurred. So if for some reason you're not going to have the message, this string is going to be shown once the component is rendered. In the case of a form, we're going to do form.proptypes. You open an object, you define the name, which you already know, and then you again use PropTypes, and then I'm going to define that it's a function and that it is required, because if we don't have that one, then everything is going to break. Cool. So now that we have our form, I think we can close that one. We don't have anything else to do with the form. Let's continue with our hook. So what are we going to do? We're gonna call our API. And what is our API? Let's open it. Here it is, our amazing API. I'm not gonna go into much detail of how we're gonna work with it, because I already did that in the previous Weather App API. So if there's something that is unclear, chances are that I have explained it there. So how the API works is basically we have one URL that we need to call in order to retrieve a where on earth ID of the location, And then this ID we can pass on to another URL, and then it's gonna give us the whole weather. All right, then let's go. So we're gonna be using AXIOS for our communication with the API. So let's import AXIOS from AXIOS. Now, what are the URLs of this API? Our base URL, const base URL. You don't have to write it in capital letters, but I feel that sometimes if you write it in capital letters, then it kind of represents that it's a major constant and cannot change, but that's probably just my preference. Our base URL is going to be whatever we have here. Just copy that, open strings, paste it here. And then we're going to put location. All of our URLs have a location in them. So in order not to repeat that, we're gonna have this in the base URL. Then we have such a thing as cross-domain issues, which we have faced again in the previous Weather API challenge. And that basically means that the browser is blocking requests that are not happening on the same domain. And that is our case because we're doing from localhost, or even if you deploy it and you put it in production on some other domain, it's still cross-domain because it's not metaweather.com, and the browser is going to block it. So in order to bypass that, there is a thing that Rob Wu created a long time ago, I think, and it's called Heroku Anywhere. He though removed that server, but he created the GitHub repository with that he said that anybody can fork it and create their own server, and that's what I did. So credit is not for me, it's for Rob Wu. Const cross domain, let's call it this way, but you can call it anyway, is gonna be this. So it's basically HTTPS, the ultimate API challenge with dashes.herokuapp.com. And the way how we're going to use that, let's create another variable called const request URL, because this is going to be what we're going to be using in the actual requests. And this one is going to consist from the base URL as well as from the cross domain. So first we prepend our base URL with the cross domain. We put a slash and then we add base URL. So basically how our request URL is going to look like is going to look like this. If we copy this, we put it here and like that, that's going to be our whole request URL. We can continue to our submit request function. So let's write AXIOS, and there is another challenge where I used AXIOS. Which one was that? I think it was the lyrics challenge. No, it was the Wikipedia challenge. Yeah, I'm going to link them here so you can always check them out if you want to see more information about those tools. Right now we're going to continue request URL. We're going to pass the location. So first, okay, let me write it here. Get where on earth ID, weird naming, I know. Second, get weather, because that's how this API works. So where do we get the where on earth ID? There we go, there we get it back. And the URL that we need to be calling is the API location, which is our base URL. And then we need to add search, template literals, request URL, and then we do /search. And then we have our query. And in AXIOS, you can pass params, and then it's gonna create this syntax from your params. So how you do it is that you open an object, you write params, you open another object, you write query, and then location. In order to see what we're getting from it, we can do const response equals AXIOS. And if, for example, here we want to do another request like this, we have to tell JavaScript to wait for whatever AXIOS is going to return to us. And how we do that? We write await. But await goes together with async, and that's what you need to remember. JavaScript needs to know in advance that this function is going to be awaiting something, and this is how we tell it to wait for something inside. I'm going to remove this one for now because that's nothing. And let's console log our response and see if we're getting something or if we're not. Refresh the page. Let's go for Berlin. Yeah, okay, so I was too fast with that. Status, okay, response, data, title, Berlin, location type, where on earth ID. Cool. So we know that our response is going to have data, so we can deconstruct it straight away. Let's console log data now. Search. It takes a while because it goes through the Heroku app thing, and that's why it's not as fast. Okay, data, what we're getting is an array. So we should also check that if we don't have a data or the array is empty, then we should not continue. So if we don't have data or data.length is 0, then we want to set an error and return. So the setting error, we're going to take this function, set an error, and what are we going to write there? No such location. Once we have the where on earth ID, we can continue to our next API call where we're going to get the actual weather. And this API call, there we have it, the location. So we're going to do const response equals await, because we again want AXIOS to, we want JavaScript to await until we have a response from our API. And we're going to construct it again. It's going to be our request URL slash our where on earth ID. And this one is in data. Let's check here. It was data 0 where on earth ID. So it's data 0 dot where on earth ID. And let's console log our response. Berlin. Oops. Ooh, we don't have anything. There is no such location. Look at that. Worked out. Berlin. There we have, but our error didn't disappear because we need to reset it. But okay, data, woohoo, we got everything. Nice. Let's refactor a little bit this whole situation here. Okay, so submit request. We have two API calls, then we have a check for if something is there or not there. Then we need to also check it here, and then we will need to prepare the data. So this function is already doing way too much than it should. So let's start breaking it down. First, we're gonna do the const get where on earth ID. It's always weird to type it. That one is going to be a sync function that is going to take the location, and we can just move this part up here. This command is redundant, and we're gonna call this function in here. Get where on earth ID, and we're going to pass the location. Now we do need to keep this function async because whatever we receive from the get ID, let's call it just get ID, we're going to return the data. So here it's going to be const data equals await, because we still need to wait for whatever JavaScript is going to return us from the other await. We cannot just continue. If I would not put the await here, JavaScript would straight away jump to the second function here. And this one we're also going to extract to its own function, const get forecast data, because we're actually going to receive the data there already. Let's not forget to make it async. And here we're gonna have where on earth ID. Move this up, then we can return, for now, let's return response.data. We're gonna check first if we have that or not. And here, let's do const another data, response equals await get forecast data, and we're gonna pass it. So in this case, let's just pass it straight away. So this function doesn't need to have too much of it. So in here we can remove because we're going to be using just the ID that we have. Make sense? Makes sense. Okay. So here we want to check that if we can instruct data again. So data is always going to be there because that's just part of the thing that every response gets. It has a config, data, headers, request, and in case of an error, it's going to return an error. Although I think as long as I work with this API doesn't return an error. If something doesn't work, then unless it's like a status of 404 or 500, then it's just going to return an empty data value. So we just need to check that if no data or data.length equals 0, then what are we going to do? We're going to again set an error, but this time we're going to say something went wrong because we do have the location, but for some reason it didn't continue forward. Went wrong. Don't you just love such very descriptive error messages for the user? Then we're going to return. We're going to return out of it because we don't want to continue. And if we do have stuff, then we would like to return it to this function and catch it here. Now let's maybe swap this with response, and here we're gonna have response, and then here we're gonna have data. Let's remove this console log. So you see those functions are pretty repetitive. They're quite doing the same thing but different URLs. And the ultimate check, let's see if we have our data once we did all those changes. Let's search for Berlin. Yeah, awesome. That's everything we need. Cool. Okay, now we would like to also show a loader. right? So as soon as we get the submit request, we should set loading to true. And since we're here already, set loading to true. Let's also set the error to false, because remember when we received that there is an error and then we submitted the request again, it still showed that there is an error, although that was not about our current request. Let's clean that up. So loading is true, error is false, save it. Let's see what we're gonna get now. We have our loader and we got our thing. Okay. Now let's try and have an error. Let's say Berlin. Let's search. Goes for 0. All right, so since we are only doing a return here, we're still expecting a response here, regardless if it was returned to us or not. So we should check if there's no response, or if there is a response but we don't have where on earth ID, then we want to return. We kind of want to stop the function from continuing. And here we can just return the data straight away, like the first thing that we get from the array, because we're gonna get only one thing. Let's see what other error we didn't cover. If we do Berlin, there is no such location. Cool, so we get the error, which should show us the form again. If we have an error, let's do set loading, and we're gonna set it to false. And the same here. So let's refresh. Let's do again deliberate error, search, a loader. There is no such location and the form is back, so we can resubmit our thing. One thing that this class name is missing, because I don't want the error to appear so below, we need to do position relative, and there we go. Cool. Okay, back to our hook. So we have our where on earth ID, we got our forecast data, and we return this forecast data. Now let's also check that we are for sure returning the forecast data. And if there is no data, then we would like to return, because the error and the loading were handled here in the functions above it. And now we get to do the fun parts. And the fun parts are about adding all the information that we get to our components. So if we check, it's a little bit squished here, but if we check this one, we see that we have this part of the component, which is a component here called current day. Then we have this part of the component, which is the current day description. And then we have this part of the component, which is the upcoming days forecast. That was actually something that I asked over my Instagram and checked which naming would make the most sense to those components. So if you want to take participation in any further polls like that, then check that one out. I'm posting quite regularly there, and that was fun. So basically that's what the community chose, and we're rolling with that naming. Let me bring it back to squishy, and let's go back to our weather app. See that we have our components here. How do we prepare the data? So usually how I prefer it is to kind of like prepare all the data before giving it to even a component, because essentially, especially with the new updated React, all the preparation of the data should happen in the hooks or somewhere on the backend ideally, but since we don't have a backend here and we're working with what we have, then I would say that we should prepare it in the hook and then send the prepared data for the components just to display it. So the least logic you have in the components themselves, the better it is. That's considered best practices, and we're gonna follow that one. I have included 3 functions in the helpers folder, which is, let's start with current day forecast. And basically it takes the data that we're given it. Let's see which data we're talking about, so it's gonna be easier. Loading, okay, data is here. So here we have tons of data, which we love. For the current day forecast, we're gonna use the consolidated weather, and we're gonna use the first one because that's what, I mean, there's not big difference for Berlin, it's always rain, but in general there is a difference. So for today, 16th of May, that's gonna be our data that we're gonna be using in this function. The same happens in the upcoming days forecast, where we're gonna be sending the whole array except of this first one, or we're actually sending it, but we're removing it. So we're slicing it out from the array. And then we have our detailed forecast where we have the predictability, humidity, blah, 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 blah. And that's also from the first one. There is air pressure, humidity, max temp, weather, wind, and all this kind of stuff. So let's import those things. So we're not gonna be calling this in here, all of them. We're gonna be creating a separate function for that. And we're gonna call it gather forecast data. And it's gonna be here. Let's remove this comment. It's useless already. Const gather forecast data, a lovely function, and it's gonna receive data. Okay, now let's copy this function in here because they're so long. I don't want to keep typing them. And one more. This is going to be a function. Let's check what it expects. Get current day forecast is this one. It expects the data and the title. So the data and applicable date. So we said that it's going to be consolidated weather and the first one. So let's go for it. Data dot consolidated weather and the first one. Then it also wanted a title. And the title is not in the consolidated weather, it's outside of it. So it's just data.title. Go data.title. And how we work with that is that it also what? Returns us things. Exactly. It's gonna return us this whole object, and that's what we're gonna be using. So const current day equals this thing. Let me close it. Then the second function, the prediction that is gonna happen here, it wants only the data, and we said that it's gonna be again the consolidated weather and the 0 because it's gonna be the description of today's weather. Let's copy it from here. Data consolidated weather and the 0 index, and const current day details equals to that one. And last but not least, get upcoming forecast. I think we just need to send the whole thingy. Yeah, so we have data and we're just looping over it. Yeah, so it's gonna be just the consolidated weather without the index because we want all of them. And again, we catch in what the function returns to us in upcoming days. Save it. Now the fun part starts. Where do we use all these things? We're gonna use it in this forecast variable that we created before, and we're gonna change it with this set forecast function. So we're gonna do set forecast. We're gonna open an object and we're gonna include all of those ones here in order to just make it more simple. Or maybe it looks simple to me, but not to you. Sorry about that. And then we're gonna do the set loader or loading to false because we have the data. Whew. All right. So the set forecast is setting the forecast, which means that the forecast that we return from the use forecast hook is being available to us here, and we should see the forecast component. Oh no, cannot read consolidated weather of undefined. Did I forget to pass it? Yeah, I did. To gather forecast data, we need to pass the data. Typical. Woohoo, nice. Alrighty. Cool, so let's go back to the page. One thing that I see straight away is that this whole shebang should not be here once we have a forecast. If no forecast, render this amazing div. Otherwise, we don't want to see you. Yay, cool. Okay, now let's go to our forecast component. Exciting times. Oh no, wait, before I do this mistake again, let's pass the forecast to the forecast component. So now that we have it here, let's define the prop types, and we're gonna do it again in the same way. Forecast.PropTypes equals what it's gonna include. It's gonna include everything that we set it the forecast to be. So we can copy that, current day details, and upcoming days. And we're gonna paste it here. These ones are gonna be prop types. So current day is an object. Then current details is an array, and this one is an array as well. But we forgot that this is inside of our forecast, so we need to write forecast PropTypes.shape. So you explain what's gonna be inside of your forecast. Now let's get to actually adding things into our component. This is kind of like a middleware component. We need to import all of our other components that are going to participate in this party. And in our case, it's the current day description, and upcoming days forecast. And we're gonna import them here. So current day is going to go in here, current day. And we're gonna pass to the current day information. And the way we're gonna pass it, we're gonna open curly brackets. I'm gonna open curly brackets, and spread the information we have. Forecast.current day. What is it gonna do? Awesome, it appears also with an image. We're gonna be able to use here all of our props that we want without kind of like double deconstructing them. Let's go to the function that shapes the current day forecast. I'm gonna put it here below so we have the information what we're doing. We're gonna be receiving a weekday, date, location, temperature, weather icon, and weather description. And again, let's create the prop types to them. And don't forget to import the prop types. Now, where are we gonna use what? In our first div, we're gonna have an h2 with a class name of font weight bold and margin bottom 1. And if I press on tab, it's gonna emit the thing and it's gonna do a magic. There we go. And in here, I'm gonna use the weekday property. See, we have a Sunday. Awesome. Next, we have a paragraph tag with a class name of margin bottom 0. By the way, all those classes where you see like this kind of like dashes, it's Bootstrap classes. I like using Bootstrap just because I'm just used to using it. Here we're gonna use date. And the next one is going to be another paragraph. Inside of it, we're gonna have an image. So our icon, not the weather icon, it's gonna be this location icon. So it's like a pin icon. Let me just copy that one in here. If at some point there is something that is not clear or you kind of feel that I missed something, then check the finished result files on GitHub and all this code is gonna be there. Then we have a span with our location variable. Save it, yay. And then we have the next div, which is kind of like it has space and then it goes below. And it has the image with the weather icon, as well as the temperature and the weather description. Ta-da! Awesome, so we have the current day done. Now let's continue to our details. Let's open them up. Details forecast, get back to our forecast. And in here, in this column, we're going to include our current day description component. This time we're gonna pass forecast as forecast.current day details. Why are we passing it like that and we're not spreading it as here above? Because this one is an array. Let's open this one. Forecast, because that's how we named it, right? Yeah. And again, don't forget the prop types. And in our case, it's an array. And in here, we're going to loop over our array. So forecast.map. And instead of writing here all the HTML for that, we have a separate component for it. And it's called current day description item. Let's import it from current day description item. And what we're gonna do is we're writing the current description item, and what we want to access is the item of this loop, and we're spreading the item here, and as well as including a key, because every loop in React needs to have a key. And the uniqueness of it is gonna come from the name. Now, if we're gonna open the current description item, we're gonna see here some boilerplate, some template, and in our case, we're passing name, value, and unit. So let's deconstruct them here, name, value, unit. Again, prop types. Cool, save it. And now our name is going to be in this paragraph. Let's save and see what we have. Nice. And in here, we're going to have our value, space, and then our unit. And voila. Oh, nice, 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 nice. We have another one, and it's the upcoming days forecast. Let's paste it, upcoming days forecast. Where is our hook? Let's open it. Yeah, here is forecast. And in this case, we're gonna pass days because that's representative of what we want to show, because we're gonna be showing the small days. And then forecast.upcoming days. Save it. Let's go to upcoming days forecast. Let's include here days. Do again the prop types. But since my camera is gonna die soon, I'm gonna just go for it like this, .map, day. And what we're gonna return is a special component again. Yes, yes. Let's import it. And what we're gonna spread into it is going to be the day. And again, we're gonna have a key because it needs to be unique. Item.weekday. Save it. Oops. Day.weekday. Oh, what am I doing? And now if we go to the forecast item, we know that we're gonna be passing those ones. We're gonna pass in weekday temperature and image URL. And here is how we're gonna be using them. We have an image, which is our icon, and I pasted it with an image-based URL, which I have in my other code. Let me copy paste that one. There we go. And then we're gonna have a span with our weekday and another span with our degrees. Nice. Don't forget also about the prop types. I'm gonna include them in the final results. Let's see if everything works. Refresh. Hello. No such location. Awesome. Let's do Berlin. Why did it take me so long to think about it? I don't know. Yay. Awesome. We have this. It should be responsive. Yes, it is. Awesome. I think that's all. I hope you enjoyed this challenge. That's the weather app in React spin-off kind of challenge. What did we cover? We covered async, await. We covered how to use React hooks, how to use custom-made hooks, how to pass props, functions as props, how to pass the value that we have from one component through a function to another function to a hook. Whew. We also use prop types and kind of like dipped our toes in React and saw how things work here. So if you enjoyed this challenge and you find this helpful, then please let me know in the comments. It means always a lot to me. Also, if you have anything you wish to be improved or any further challenges that you wish to see covered or APIs or really anything, please let me know. I'm always answering to all the comments and I'm very glad to see any feedback you have to give. I'm gonna wrap it up quick before my camera dies. I'm gonna wish you a good day, evening, night, wherever you are. Stay safe and see you next time. Bye!